I'm the Governor's nominee for the Director of Revenue, David Harris, and to answer the spokesperson's initial inquiry about the issue of 90 consecutive days, keep in mind that some of this can be defined in rules, and it's very common for something like that to be defined in rules, and we can do that in rules. We don't think that that is a problem. In terms of the full-time equivalency, remember that the bill deals or allows employers with less than 50 employees. And the full-time equivalency can be defined as this, and it's a very simple example. Let's say you have 200 employees and they work 100 hours. Excuse me, 200 employees and they work at $10 an hour. That's 2,000 hours. Divided by the number of weeks, divided by the number of hours in the week, let's say it's a 40-hour work week, 2,000 hours divided by 40 is 50. So even though you might have 100 employees or 200 employees, when you get that calculation, you have only 50 full-time equivalent employees. So it is quite possible, as an example, for a Goodwill industry or a Goodwill store that might have more than 50 employees, but they don't work they don't work a full 40-hour week. They would be eligible for this credit, and it's probable that the overwhelming majority of businesses in the state of Illinois would be eligible for the credit using that ratio.
I think I understand what you just said, and if what you said reflects the bill or what's in the bill, I understand that. Okay.
And to pick up on what the sponsor indicated, the term full-time equivalent employee is a term of art in the business, if you will, of employment that is understood.
40 hours a week.
Well, that again could be defined by rule. If one were to say that the work week is only 35 hours, then at the example I just gave you, they would have more than 50 employees. I just use that to round it off to give you an easy example.
Okay, so let's say we have an employer with 49 total employees, or 53 part-time employees, and 3 of them are part-time, and they work a number of hours that don't add up to that 40-hour-a-week threshold that we all understand is the nature of full-time work. Are we back under 50 then?
You'd have to give me, quite frankly, it's a numeric ratio, so you'd have to give me the number of hours worked and the number of employees, and I divide it by the hours in the work week.
Let's make a simpler question here. Are employers not able to take the credit for part-time employees?
No, they are.
They are.
They are.
Yeah.
Okay.
They are.
Going to Mr. Worley's question about 90 consecutive days, assuming for the moment that your interpretation is correct as to the general nature of what we're doing here, and I'm not willing to concede that, but I'm going to do it for purposes. Does that mean that a business that hires seasonal employees who only work a month or two will never be able to claim the credit for wages paid, since an employer may not claim a credit for an employee who has worked fewer than 90 consecutive days in the preceding reporting period? I'm thinking of stores and UPS and people like that who hire people on a part-time seasonal basis. Does that mean that those people will never be able to take the credit because those people work fewer than 90 days in a previous reporting period?
If the sponsor would like me to address that as well, the comparison is, and the seasonal example is something we took into consideration. The comparison is this quarter versus the same quarter the previous year, so that when, should an employer hire a large number of employees for the, let's say for the holiday season, the last quarter, the comparison is made as to the quarters from the last quarter of the most immediate year and the last quarter of the preceding year.
That doesn't eliminate the impact of my question. You know, you've got people who work 30, 40, 50 days during the season, in the previous reporting period, and now they're working 30, 40, 50 days in the current period, they're not going to be able to get the credit for those employees because they didn't work 90 consecutive days in the previous reporting period.
If I might jump in, that 90-day period, as those folks are coming on board, the employer is already receiving a benefit during that period because those employees are paid a training wage, which is 50 cents diminished from the minimum wage. So there's already accommodation.
We're talking about the credit, Will. We're not talking about a reduction in the wage.
I understand. My point is that the employer is receiving, receiving a benefit, if you will, although I'm not sure I'd call it that. But again, to be charitable and grant your assumptions, the employer is credited that 50 cents if they choose to pay a training wage to the employee during that period, so as to minimize the impact of the increase on their bottom line.
That does not address the credit question, but we'll move on. On page 23 and 24, you talk about shall not be eligible for credits for all employees making less than $55,000 during a reporting period is greater than blah, blah, blah. What's the significance of the $55,000 figure?
It avoids the employer, it's a measurement that avoids the employer being able to reduce the number of employees than what they had before.
I don't get that.
That's a calculation by way of a way to avoid an employer laying off or dismissing individuals.
Yeah, but we're talking about individual employees making less than $55,000 during a reported period. So, I'm going to ask you to provide me with some sort of written explanation of that with an example, please.
Certainly.
Maximum credit. Will, please. Maximum credit means the percentage of the difference between the amount of compensation paid in Illinois to employees who are paid not more than the required minimum wage, reduced by the amount of compensation paid in Illinois who were paid less than the minimum wage. Now, is the credit that an employer is eligible for, is it based upon a percentage of the wage or the taxes withheld? And I'll give you a reason why. If we raise the minimum wage to $9.25 in the first year, okay, that's $1, and the guy works 40 hours a week, he'll make $40 more a week, okay? 25% of that is $10.
Right.
But at 4.95%, which is our current Illinois income tax rate, the $9.25 guy would have $18.32 withheld from his pay, and the $8.25 guy, the previous quarter, would have with $16.34 withheld from his pay, a difference of $1.98. 25% of that is 50 cents.
No,
what is the credit?
It's on the basis of the wage. So in the example that you just gave, the credit is on the basis of the $10 differential between.
So my employer is going to get a $10 credit against a tax liability that's computed at 4.95% of wages. Is that what you're saying?
That's my understanding of the legislation as it's written, yes. Against
if I have one,
not against their income tax, it's against their withholding, their
I understand that,
tax.
Will, but you're calculating a credit based on the language in this bill, based upon the difference in the wage, not the tax. And when an employer files an IL-941, the thing he's doing is reporting the tax, not the income. The income is for informational purposes only. The tax is what he remits to the state.
That's correct. And he's required to remit a tax, he or she or they are required to remit a tax that is at an amount reduced by this exact amount you're describing. The differential between
$10.
Yes, that the tax required to be remitted is reduced by that amount.
Let's assume for purposes we only have one employee and he works according to this wage schedule.
Great.
During the quarter, he's going to have $18.32 paid in as withholding or have withheld from his pay. The employer then will only be obliged to pay in $8.32 because his credit is $10.
That is the nature of the credit. Yes, it's as your face is indicating, it's quite a generous credit to those employers.
I think it's a very generous credit, but I do believe that we're going to have probably some dispute as to what this really comes out to be, because I cannot see giving a credit based upon one set of parameters against a tax which is calculated at a lower percentage. There's something in here that just doesn't smell right. I would take that $10 credit and run like a thief, but I would not agree that that's what the intent of that particular provision is. I will go on one final. Do employers who take leave under FMLA and that, do they remain on the payroll for purposes of calculating full-time employees?
I'm sorry, does who?
Anybody who takes medical leave under FMLA, do they stay on the payroll for purposes of if they're being paid family leave? Do they stay on the rolls for purposes of the credit?
Yeah, so the full-time equivalency is a question about the number of hours worked in total, right? So if you've got 100 people who are working 20 hours a week, that's an equivalent of 2,000 person hours per week, right? If someone's on leave, they're not working any hours, so they're not contributing to that number.
I guess then that goes to Representative Worley's question. You just said worked again. What do you mean by worked?
Representative Wright, you're on point number 6 now. So could you please bring, well, you said 4, so you got to bring your remarks to a close. We have other speakers.
I had 4 on just that one, but anyway.
Please bring them to a close.
I'll pass.
All right, thank you, sir. Please add Representative Skilcorn to the roll. Please add Representative Cabello to the roll. Minority spokesperson Worley for comment. Representative Wheeler for question. Wheeler for question. I'll do that. Okay. Wheeler for question. Go ahead. Move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, what's the effective date of this bill?
The first wage increase in the bill becomes effective on January 1st of next year.
Okay. So, in other words, it does not take any kind of a supermajority to get this out on time and be in a rush to get an effective date earlier than January 1st of next year.
I believe the bill requires 60 and 30.
Right, which means that we have until May 31st to pass that and still have the same effective date.
Yeah,
correct?
you know, I think I get a sense of what you're driving at here, Representative. And I would just say that there are a lot of folks in this room and a lot of folks around the state who have been waiting for 10 years for the state to do something for them.
Doing this
and I believe that those, if you don't mind my finishing my sentence,
month,
Representative, if you don't
what's
mind.
That?
If you don't mind my just finishing this statement I'm in the
Go
middle
ahead.
of. I believe that we have an opportunity to earn some good faith with those folks. Not by waiting and dithering and debating an issue that we've discussed for 2 years. You and I and most of the people in this room have discussed this exact bill for 2 years. But by acting immediately, and by showing the folks of the state of Illinois who elected this legislature and this governor, based on promises of doing things just like this, to show those folks that we heard them and that we are taking action to make their lives a little bit better. That's why we're moving fast.
Okay, well then I'm going to point out the other part of this bill, Will, that there are a whole bunch of folks in this state that are concerned about the effects of this. They don't understand the full ramifications of what we are actually doing with this legislation. We are going so fast that we can't even slow down to fix one word, not a word. I reached out to you a few days ago, and I'm grateful you called me back. We haven't had a chance to discuss it. I'd hoped we'd do that because I was under the impression that this new approach, this new day in Springfield we all talked about back in January, was going to truly be that we were going to talk about things before we passed them. We have all the time in the world. With all due respect to everyone in this room, holding this bill for a week does not change the effective date of when the minimum wage actually takes effect.
Representative, this is a bill that we discussed at tremendous length 2 years ago with almost no difference.
And yet we still have problems in the language.
I mean, aside from Representative Worley's at best semantic questions around the meaning of the word worked, it sounds to me like the only questions about this bill are ones of fundamental values of whether we ought to be giving people a raise or not. And I have no sense from any conversation I've had with you or anyone else that a few little technical tweaks here and there and you guys would be fine with the bill.
Well, I'm pretty sure you're going to pass this bill tomorrow. I'm not debating that part of it. I am, however, a member of the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules. I'm one of the co-chairs of that actual committee, which means I care about the rules process and I care about getting things right. I have to deal with rules that I voted against and spoke strongly against on the House floor. And yet in the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, I'm charged with the idea of getting those laws correct based on the rule that follows the law, which is based entirely on the statute, which is made up of words. Those words have to be right in order for those intentions to be met. We have filed many trailer bills in this legislature over my short tenure here, fixing things that were unintended consequences. Why in the world we can't slow down and fix a few things before we get there in this one is purely political as far as I can tell right now. And that disappoints me. because I thought we were going to take a new approach that was going to be more collaborative, more open. And yeah, we may not agree on things. I may not vote for your bill. Doesn't mean I won't try and help you make it a better bill for the state of Illinois. I know you hold me to that standard, Will, as I hold it to you.
Sure.
So my point really is, we could slow down, fix the definitions of full-time equivalent employees, because I don't know if it's 40 hours a week, as Representative Reich suggested, 32 hours, as some folks have said, based on federal issues, or 30, according to the ACA. There are all kinds of different opinions here about what those words mean. Asking for clarification means we should have more meetings on this. Holding Representative Reich to 4 points instead of 6, my gosh, come on, you guys. This is a huge piece of legislation that impacts hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in the state and every taxpayer, and yet we have to rush it through for a reason that has nothing to do with legislation. Let's be serious. Slow down. Let's get this right. I really wish we'd do that. Well, I know you would prefer to do that, I think, if you had your own way on this.
Thank you, Representative Wheeler, for your comments. Representative
Do you mind,
Skillcorn for
Representative
questions
Evans?
and comment.
I'm sorry, briefly, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Skillcorn for question and comment. We got to move forward.
Oh, no, go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Will. So what are we going to do about workers that are displaced because their labor is only worth $10, $11, $12? If they lose their jobs, what are you planning to do with these displaced workers?
In what sense do you suggest that their labor is worth $10, $11, or $12?
Frankly, some people are going to lose their jobs if this legislation passes. So there are some people, their skill level, based on where they are, competitive wage, their labor may not be worth $15. It might be worth $11, $12, $13, $14. What are we going to do about those people?
Well, two things, Representative. One is that there's ample economic data to suggest that in jurisdictions that have raised their minimum wage, they've seen, by and large, no meaningful impact, positive or negative, on employment. So the abstract idea that all of a sudden jobs are going to go away isn't borne out by the data. But secondly, to the suggestion that anybody's labor is worth $8.25 or $10 or $11 or $12, I think it's an offensive suggestion to the folks who are laboring. I think anyone in this state who's working for that wage would tell you they are not being compensated fairly. They are being kept in poverty by being paid a wage that is less than the value of the dignity of the work that they put in every day. I think there are a lot of people in this room who would attest to that, and there's more than 1 million people in the state of Illinois who would say that I work hard every day and my labor ought to be valued at a rate such that I can take care of my family.
So you believe that politicians and bureaucrats set value, not what the product of their labor is?
I believe that we have a responsibility as government to intercede when the market is failing people. And in this instance, I believe that the market is failing working people who are at the very bottom of our economy, who are being paid the bare minimum by employers who can afford to do a whole heck of a lot better. The market is not raising the wages for these folks. The invisible hand of capitalism isn't supporting people. And it's time in those instances when the market fails people, that's when government steps in. That's our responsibility, to provide basic decency, basic stability, and basic well-being for the people of this state when the invisible hand of capitalism lets them down.
It's interesting that you go that route. So, what about, some of these business owners that literally work 60, 70, 80 hours a week. And when I asked them, and literally yesterday I asked an owner of a restaurant, what's she going to do when this passes? And she tells me she's going to work harder, she's going to work longer, she's going to have to, deal with other people doing other jobs, and that she is going to have to discount her product. She's going to have to cut her margins. She certainly does not believe that it's going to benefit her, and frankly, it's not going to benefit her staff. When she already pays, line cooks more than minimum wage, more than $15 an hour. But now, when they have to have people that are busboys or dishwashers, now competing with line cooks, she said this is not going to work for her, and she's going to end up doing some of this work and working even harder in the business she's been doing for 30, 40 years. Do you have any comment on her situation, her plight?
Well, it's challenging for me to address anecdotal evidence. I think we could certainly muster a great deal of anecdotal evidence from those same busboys and dishwashers that their lives are being made miserable by being paid poverty wages. I can tell you, however...
their lives get better if they don't have a job.
I can tell you, however, that the economic data that has studied the effects of the minimum wage in jurisdictions where it has been raised, which at this point are many around the country, the conclusion of all of the economic data that has looked at this has said that the net effect on employment is nil, that there's essentially no variance in employment between communities that see the minimum wage go up and their adjacent communities that see minimum wage stay the same. Therefore, all I can tell you is that raising the minimum wage based on science and data has no discernible impact on employment in the economy as a whole.
And one thing I'd like you to address, a few moments ago, you compared debate with dithering. And sir, debate is a fundamental part of democracy. And even though this is hell-bent to get passed tomorrow, I think it's shameful that we want to cut down debate, we want to cut down questions. This is a serious matter, and we should be asking questions. If we're not asking questions, why are we voting on it tomorrow?
I believe there's been ample opportunity to ask questions. I've appreciated the many we've had so far and the many we had last week, and I suspect there are many more to come.
Okay, well, I just hope I don't see questions shut down and debate shut down, because that is exactly what democracy is supposed to be, and I know you're a true believer in democracy.
I sure am.
Thank you.
Good, thank you, Representative Skillcorn. Representative Bennett for questions.
Representative, obviously you have a true passion for helping people, and I appreciate that. And I think everyone in this room has the same concern for people, both that are workers, that also run businesses, that risk basically everything they have to get a business started. I think we're all there. And we asked you a question that I asked last week. How do we decide on 15? And if we talked about 18, 16, 13. I see the great T-shirts. That helps me out a little bit. Appreciate that. But can you help me? How did you, scientifically, we talk about data and all those things I've heard you mentioning. How did you come up with 15, if you could?
Sure. So this may be a little bit redundant to my answer last week, but I'll say it again. You can calculate the cost of living in communities all around the state of Illinois, and you'll see that in communities in your district and in my district, $8.25 just doesn't cut it. And that the cost of living, when you calculate in things like healthcare and the cost of food and housing and all those things, in various communities, even today, not accounting for the inflation that'll happen over the coming 6 years, even today, the cost of supporting a family is right around $15 an hour anywhere in the state of Illinois, and much higher, in fact, in some parts of Illinois, like the parts that I represent. But the specific number 15, I will say, is largely a function not only of that economic reality which faces folks in both of our communities, but of the national consensus around this issue and the movement that's represented by the folks in this room and that's represented by folks around the state and across the country, a movement that suggests that we ought not settle for anything less than 15, and that 15 represents the very bare minimum of a decent quality of life anywhere in this country, and that as a result, there's an unwillingness to compromise for a 10 or 11 or 12, but there's an insistence and a demand that 15 ought to be the basic floor. And the legislation you see here before you reflects that the wisdom and the leadership of the people who are toiling under these conditions today.
Okay. Last week, we heard a number of folks from a variety of business associations come to you and share their concerns in a number of ways. Irma, if I may, a number of groups came and shared some alternatives, some serious alternatives to deal with the differences in terms of, you mentioned cost of living, which it is different around the state of Illinois. We have a wonderful city in Illinois called Chicago, but you won't find that in other places. I have an area of 65 small towns, villages, communities that I think the business association groups around the state of Illinois were trying to address and try to come to you with alternatives for those things, anywhere from geographically differences for that, as well as extending the years to a longer period of time. And I guess I would like to know, for the record, what's your take on this?
Yeah, my take on this is that irrespective of whether you live in a big city or a small town, you can't get by today on $8.25 an hour. And I wouldn't profess to speak for the folks whom you represent, but I suspect that in the communities that you represent, someone working full-time and making $16,000 a year isn't going to be able to provide for their family, right? I don't mean to, if that's not true, correct me, but my assumption is that that's not going to be a living wage for anybody in your community or mine.
So the concerns that the business groups brought to you, specifically about the alternatives to try and help everyone work through this. And I don't mean to speak for Irma and other groups, but there was definitely some things that I remember being said last week that they thought there might be alternatives to really make this work for a number of people. but I haven't heard you even look at those.
The truth is that we've been having conversations with business folks, representatives of certain sectors of business, for years on this subject. And we've made some accommodations which you see in the bill before you over the course, 2 years ago when we first had this conversation, and even in the negotiations in the last several weeks, at which the representatives of employers have been at the table. They've been sitting in those rooms with us. They've voiced their concerns. We've made some accommodations, but there are, it seems to me, certain folks who are not going to be happy with a version of this bill that's going to support the workers of the state of Illinois. And we appreciate the concerns. We've heard the concerns. We've accommodated some and not accommodated others. That, to me, is fairness and negotiation. Not everyone's going to be happy with negotiation. That's how negotiation goes. And some people are going to walk out of the room frustrated about it, but I think we've had a very fair, open, and transparent process.
I appreciate what you're saying, but when I listened to that conversation last week, I didn't get that same feeling.
Yeah,
when we finish, from
sure. Oh, go ahead. Sure.
And thank you for your patience on
no,
this.
Go ahead.
But when I heard them mentioning that, they said they mentioned alternatives that really thought could help both sides, business and workers, and we need everybody to make this work, right? We need everybody. We don't want to have businesses closing down. We don't want to have people losing jobs. We don't have people losing hours, which there's a lot of us in this room that are very concerned about that. And then for the business groups basically to be ignored last week on those same comments, that concerns me. And it probably concerns a number of people here as well.
Yeah, I guess I'd just say that the bill that's before you is not what we walked in the front door of those negotiations with. It's the result of a lot of back and forth and a lot of compromise. It's a longer ramp than we had initially wanted. It contains other concessions to leaders in the business community that we hadn't initially anticipated. Yeah. This bill is the result of compromise and concession. It's not everything that certain members of the business establishment would like to see, but that's just the nature of negotiation. I don't think that we could satisfy everybody at the table, unfortunately.
I don't know if any business group in support of this?
Yeah, the Illinois Restaurant Association is in support of this bill, and they've been very vocal in their support of the bill.
A number of
the Retail Merchants Association is not. I'm sure they'll voice their opposition today, as they have consistently.
I think that's important to share because, again, they represent a number of businesses around the state of Illinois with many workers, many owners, mom and pops. We need to take in mind what this is really doing. Again, I understand what you're trying to do. We're all trying to improve the living of everyone, not only the workers, but also the business. But when you got one side and the other side saying, whoa, this isn't working, we need to really back up a little bit on this. I thank you again for your time being here and trying to work through all this, but if I may use an old expression, it's not soup yet.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Bennett, for your questions. Representative Wilhile for questions, comments. Weber, Representative Weber for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've had a lot of people call me from our district and spoken to a lot of them. And so for those that don't know, I started out as working construction as a laborer. I've been working 30 years in the construction. Started my own industry. And through all the testimony, what we've heard is a lot of how the impacts of what the actual pay, how that would affect different business and stuff. And the one thing I'm not sure if you're aware of or if there's any way to address is, and just as for instance, I've worked painter, carpenter, roofer. We pay different workman comp rates. So for construction, I might pay 19%. For a roofer, might be 50%. Landscapers might be 21%. So for instance, a landscape company with 10 minimum wage employees, besides the $140,000 increase in just payroll from minimum now to $15 an hour, the increase just in workman's comp at 21% would be approximately $30,000. That's a lot different than an office building where you're paying just a fraction of a percent on workman's compensation. So how do we address that in those industries where they do hire unskilled workers such as painting, roofing, construction? So can you address those, and have you thought about those impacts on what that would be for the construction industry?
Sure. There are going to be additional costs to employers as a result of raising the minimum wage and what they're going to have to pay their workers. Well,
the impact to construction
question.
will obviously be different you know, for someone in the construction field where they're paying a larger impact on workman's comp, which in Illinois is already expensive. So it's, on a border district like myself, it starts to make Wisconsin look much more appetizing. And that's really a big concern.
Yeah, I understand. I guess I can only, again, resort to what I'm going to say a lot of times today, I suspect, which is the macroeconomic data, which has studied this question extensively and across various industry sectors. And I can probably pull up a chart here that refers to different industries. And you can see that there's no depression in job growth in communities that raise their minimum wage. So we're not seeing the sort of, the specter that we keep hearing about is that there's going to be this collapse in employment and all of a sudden people are going to be out of work because the minimum wage goes up. But we've seen in jurisdiction after jurisdiction all over this country, and even right here in the state of Illinois, we've seen hard data that says that when you raise the minimum wage, you don't see job loss. You just don't see it. So I mean, you're going to get tired of hearing me say this, but the data is very clear that a higher minimum wage does not drive down employment. That's all I can say to these kinds of questions.
And I respect that, but what I asked last week also was that data in a stagnant economy, a growing economy? You know, that makes a big difference. I wouldn't say there's a lot of business owners in my district. I've seen many go under in the last year, go out of business, and I've seen some new ones pick up, and hopefully they survive. However, I don't think any of us would say we're in a growing economy. Another, you know, concern we have is many people, like when my wife and I had children younger, one of the issues was, could my wife work or not, and who is going to take care of our children? Mm-hmm. It got to the point where my wife working ended up being a profit of maybe $10 an hour at the end of the week. She ended up staying home to take care of our kids because we couldn't afford the daycare. With this, many daycare centers will, you know, do have extra bodies in the room that are, you know, maybe not minimum wage, but maybe $10, maybe $12 an hour. The impact of this will eventually increase the cost of daycare. And couldn't that possibly have the impact of some moms not being able to, or fathers not, you know, finding it worthwhile to go get a job, even though they're already making more than the $15 an hour? At some point, that cost.
I'm so glad you brought that point up, because that's precisely what this bill is meant to address. The very trade-off you just described, the trade-off that people, working people, are having to make every day, new moms who have a baby, and say, is it worth it for me to go back to work making minimum wage, or should I stay home with my child? Because if I go back to work, I'm going to have to pay that expensive childcare cost. This is, as you know, it happened in your family, it happens in millions of families around the state. And what we see is people being taken out of the workforce because of the high cost of childcare and low wages. I think there are two solutions to that plan: raise people's wages and provide affordable childcare. This bill does one of those things, and I look forward to working with you all on doing the second.
Any further comments?
Thank you.
Representative Marwood for questioning. Representative Margaret.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative. For the record, you're doing a great job over there, so keep it up.
I need that positive reinforcement, Representative.
No, well,
I appreciate it.
Listen, they've come after you, and you've handled it really well. Now, Representative, did you study economics when you were in college at all? Did you take any courses or anything like that?
I studied comparative literature. As a matter
well,
of fact.
Okay. So, but you're a pretty smart guy. You understand what they're talking about. They're talking about the economic theory that a raise in wages will lead to losses of employment, right? And that is, to be fair, a legitimate economic theory, right? I mean, you can find that in textbooks all over about economics, right? But Representative, I was here last week, and we had that long subject matter hearing about this 1 week ago today, and I remember that the room was about as full as it is today when that hearing started, and our desks here were as full as this. But at the very end, it was a very different story. There were about half the room, maybe a third of the room was full in the audience, and there was maybe half the representatives had left, maybe 2/3 of the representatives had left. But at that point, a gentleman by the name of Professor Mark Dussard testified. Were you here to hear his testimony, Representative?
I'm afraid I wasn't, Representative.
Okay. Well, he has a PhD from the University of Illinois, and he's an associate professor of urban and regional planning. And what he talked about was specifically that, the difference between the theory and what you are stating so well. which is the data of what actually happens. He spoke about how we have ample opportunities to study this, as to the previous representative who asked the questions about, well, where did these studies come from? Well, there are 26 states in the union that have higher minimum wages than Illinois does. And he pointed out how the studies are, and I quote, voluminous. And the wave of research shows that minimum wage has, as you stated, there is no data to support that there is a negative impact on unemployment or job growth. And what he said was that evidence comes from all quarters, including in-depth studies of cities on state borders. So they look and they say, let me find two economies that are right next to each other on a state border where one minimum wage goes up relative to the other. And everything about those bordering counties or bordering jurisdictions are identical except for the change in minimum wage. And yet, the only difference that they see is that in the jurisdiction where the minimum wage was increased, that the people that are the lower income have more disposable income and are actually able to spend more to generate positive economic growth. That was what he put in a study. Is that the data that you're referring to, Representative?
That's everything that I've read about the minimum wage describes that exact phenomenon, yes.
Yes, he even stated that the most respected study that was published in the Review of Economics and Statistics, which is a very prestigious journal, found that there was no difference in job growth, not in restaurants, not low-wage service industries, and not economies as a whole. Now, I studied economics, and I understand economic theory, but the reality of it is that the data is not proving those theories at this point. The data is that there is no change. Is that correct, Representative?
It is, and I would also add, inexpert though I am, I've tried to do a little bit of reading on this, and there is a body of economic theory that suggests that, and I'm reading from literature here, so I'm going to say a lot of words I don't fully understand, both monopsony models and bilateral search models with heterogeneous workers predict that a minimum wage above the equilibrium wage may actually increase employment. So the theory's not totally one-sided here. There's some theory on one side and some theory on the other side, and then there's the reality, which shows us very clearly how this is going to affect our state.
Yes, thank you. Now, turning the page, I do have one bit of questioning. Can you at least address, I have heard some concerns, and I'd like to hear your response on how this might affect social service providers in the state. Fear that because, of course, there could be some budgetary impact, and we're already having challenges with our social service providers. How will we address that in this?
Well, I think it's very important. I about choked on some of those words too, Representative Bennett. I understand where you're coming from. I understand the concern facing our social service providers. And frankly, I think that the folks who are providing those frontline services, and you heard me say this last week, the folks who are providing those frontline services to people who are the most in need in our state, boy, they got hard jobs, and they really deserve a better rate of pay than what they're getting. But providers are unable to pay that to them because the state isn't compensating them adequately to do so. And so I know in my conversations with the governor's team that as they are crafting their budget for the coming fiscal year and as they look at the budgetary impacts long term, they are baking into their assumptions the idea that they're going to need to raise reimbursement rates for providers in order to help lift those folks out of poverty as well.
Thank you, Representative. As you know, I like to base my decisions based on whatever analysis of data I can find, and clearly I cannot see a reason why anyone, if they analyze the data that is present, would vote against your measure, so I'll be supporting it.
Thank you, Representative Martwitt. Representative Andrade for questions, comment. Representative Andrade.
Thank you, Chairman. I have two things. Just the Representative Markwick already mentioned that we need to look at the community care program. For the past couple of sessions, I've carried a bill to try to increase the rate, but this is more of a comment. I know that we're short of time, but I think my comment will bring stuff more to reality. When I don't have a PhD, I didn't study economics. It took me 24 years actually to finish college, but I will tell you this. When I worked for the city made us take 24 furlough days. So I decided to go work for a big box industry at night. And some of my coworkers would make fun of me because we were just working for a minimum wage, and I decided that it was kind of crazy when we're at this big box, you know, we would take our lunch, and they would say, Jamie, you're going to turn into a hot dog because every time we see you, you just eat hot dogs. And I said to them, well, what I don't understand, I said to my coworkers who were, for me, it was just a supplement to try to make up the money I was losing, but for them, this was their life. They're living on this. And I said to the young kid, and it was a father or two, I said, I watch you on break, I watch you on lunch, and I see you at the second break. I said, you buy food every day. I said, we only make $8.25 an hour. $8.25. I said, you have just spent on the Coke and the bag of Fritos, you spent almost more than $8. I said, so I will tell you this. My hour was worth more than a bag of Cheetos and pop. So their time is worth more than a bag of Cheetos and pop, because I lived it. So that's why anyone's labor is worth more than a bag of Cheetos and pop, because that's what I had to pay back, and that's why I said it's unconscionable that I keep working for $8.25 an hour, and then I go buy a pop and a Cheetos or buy two and just give it right back to the company. And so that brings another point, that every one of my coworkers there, every penny that they make, they actually spend twice as much as they make. All of them. So they will spend, unfortunately, they don't save a penny, but all I want to say is, and I'm going to repeat this, any human's labor is worth more than a bottle of pop and a bag of Cheetos. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Andrade. Thanks to all the members for your question and comment. Final question and comment for the panel one, spokesperson Worley.
Thank you, Chairman. Director, if I may, can you, under temporary rules granted under this bill to IDOR, promulgate rules that are in direct contradiction to clear language of legislation, and can JCAR do the same thing?
Representative, any rules that we might propose would go to JCAR, and JCAR, the individuals on JCAR would determine whether or not those rules are appropriate.
What if it's in direct contrast with the language? Can they unilaterally change the law?
Can they? You mean can JCAR?
You under emergency rules under IDOR or JCAR, because you get emergency rulemaking authority under this legislation at IDOR. Can JCAR change the clear language of a bill? Can they change the law by rule?
Quite frankly, I don't know the powers of JCAR. I would be surprised.
Well, then IDOR.
Well, first of all, I don't believe that we would file an emergency rules because of the effective date of the bill, but that's a determination that would have to be made at a later time. But they do not go into effect until January of the increase doesn't go into effect until January of next year. So I don't know that emergency rules would be necessary, but even so, I don't know that JCAR would approve anything that contravenes legislative language.
When I was in college, I worked on a concrete construction crew. I shoveled concrete, house foundation, sidewalks, things like that, hard, back-breaking labor. I was employed. If I took Saturday and Sunday off, did I work? I'm getting to the line in here.
If you're coming down to the question of consecutive, is that what you're?
Yes.
Okay. And again, it's my understanding from talking to the lawyers that drafted this that the concept of consecutive, because I asked them this, can be covered in rules. So They believe that it can be done. I do not believe. I don't believe that it's something that cannot be
You have
overcome.
no distinction between being employed and working. To you, they're interchangeable words. So I can be employed and not work. I mean, some may claim that we do that as legislators. Just saying.
If I might,
If someone is, sir, if someone is being paid for the time that they are on the job, and they are being paid a wage for that period of time, I make the assumption
But I'm not
they are
working.
working.
I'm not working Saturday, Sunday. I'm not getting that wage. I didn't work. This clearly says worked, not employed. So I think we have a legal morass here that could clearly be simply cleared up quite easily with one amendment that adds two, that strikes one word, adds two. But because this is on such the fast track, we're not going to do that. Representative Guzzardi, you mentioned earlier that you had some studies that show no impact. Could you provide us with the jurisdictions? Is that Seattle? Is that Chicago? Is that where is that
well,
in?
There is a wide body of research, but the best of the studies look at multiple jurisdictions.
Could you provide that with us and the
sure.
wage rate as well?
Absolutely, yeah. The sort of one of the
tomorrow.
most.
We have apparently this will be on the floor tomorrow.
Well,
so
I can do it right now while we're sitting here,
Well, I'd
Representative.
prefer you email it to either me or
I'd
I'm
be
sure
thrilled.
it's a ton of data.
A quick Google will reveal ample data on this subject.
So you're not going to provide it to me?
I will happily provide it
Thank
to you
you.
verbally, by email. I can point you to google.com, however you'd like to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you. No further questions. Thank you, panel one, for all of your work. We're going to be moving on to second panel, our opponents panel. President of the Illinois Retail Merchants Association, Rob Carr. You'll be part of panel two. Mr. Carr, President Carr, if you don't mind, could you please, what did I say, President? I'm sorry, President Carr. You're going to introduce your guests. Would you like me to introduce your guests? Yeah, we're going to finish, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the promotion. Does that mean I get a veto?
I don't know. And please, just as all panels, keep your remarks as short as you can. We had a very lengthy subject matter.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Rob Carr, as was noted, President of the Illinois Retail Merchants Association. You all hear from me and have the opportunity to hear from me frequently. I'd be happy to answer questions if you have some later, but I'd rather you heard directly from the employers who are impacted by this. So if that's okay with you, Mr. Chairman, we'll proceed with their brief statements.
Yes, please.
That's okay. Good afternoon. My name is Colin DeLoe. I'm the Director of Government Affairs and Business Development for the Naperville Area Chamber of Commerce, and I'm here to share some of those stories of employers that have furiously been working over the past week to understand what the impact will be on their individual businesses. Just as a bit of background on our organization, we represent about 1,200 businesses in the Naperville area. That goes from the sole proprietors all the way up to multinationals. We do feel that obviously this will have a different impact on the employer, of course. You know, it is not a one-size-fits-all policy, but it will have dramatically different effects on different kinds of businesses. For us, we have heard from many of our businesses, as I mentioned, that have spent the past week really trying to dive in because, frankly, the details on this bill matter and matter dramatically. One particular business owner that I spoke with over the past week hasn't slept in 3 days and is trying to really drill down with his accountants over that, you know, just line by line what this potential wage change will have for his business. He estimates that $15 for the minimum wage increase, $971,000 over 12 locations. And so to be able to maintain the viability of that business, he's evaluating many of the options that are available to him, whether those be layoffs of higher priced or higher cost employees, including price increases that will be passed on to customers, or reduction in benefits to maintain employee levels and maintain service levels so that a business may continue. Similarly, we spoke with a business with 3 locations in our area. They have about 400 to 500 employees. Average wage currently is $13.50 an hour. And they're looking at similar structures to be able to maintain the viability of their business as well. Benefits reductions, layoffs of the higher wage employees potentially, or reductions in force, you know, over the period as that continues, or increasing those costs to the customer. The details on this matter, and our business owners are working very hard to understand the impact. And we ask that you continue in good faith to understand what those impacts are and to find a solution that works for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just state your name for the record, please. State your name and the organization you're from, and continue with your brief remarks.
My name is Karen Kahn, and I'm President and CEO of Kahn's Hospitality Group here in Springfield, and we have locations in Springfield and Peoria. My family and I own and operate a diverse mix of businesses. They span across lodging, restaurants, coffee shops, antique stores. I am a member of the Illinois Restaurant Association. I'm one of a very small pool of restaurants outside of Springfield that they represent. And we have had discussions about this, and downstate members were not in agreement with the decision that IRA made. My family and I combined, we employ over 150 individuals, and they're from diverse backgrounds, and we do everything we can to ensure that they earn a livable wage based on the cost of living in Springfield. We do pay above minimum wage, and I do agree that minimum wage should be increased, but I want to emphasize that I think consideration really needs to be given to geographic locations within the state. I and many other small businesses across the state of Illinois are concerned that our local economies are being perceived as comparable to the bustling Chicago, Illinois. I live here, work here, play here every single day, and I'm here then to tell you that Springfield is nowhere comparable. There's massive differences that exist in the economies of Chicago to, say, Springfield, Belleville, Ottawa, Collinsville. Chicago has the benefit of being the third largest city in the country, and it reported last year 57.6 million tourist visits. It is also one of the largest concentration of corporate headquarters and personal wealth. There's no other city or region in Illinois that can come even close to the economic advantages of Chicago. The cost of living is just as varied. An apartment or home values and a gallon of milk are significantly less expensive than it is in Chicago. So simply put, there's no comparison for southern, central, eastern, western Illinois to the economies of Springfield or Chicago or the cost of living. Each of our 5 businesses provides an entry-level position to less skilled workforce, and we've been able to offer resources and training that result in higher pay and potential long-term career positions. 33 years ago, in April, I will have started my work journey in an entry-level position. I had absolutely no experience, and I had a strong desire to learn and to grow, and because I was afforded that opportunity, today I am the CEO and president of Kahn's Hospitality. It is the one and the same company that I started, but they gave me a chance, they trained me, and today, now I'm their leader. I want to continue to preserve these opportunities, the resources for personal development and professional training for the less skilled workforce. But I'm fearful that the state's $15 minimum wage will cause so much economic pain for Central Illinois that I will be forced to eliminate these entry-level positions. I don't say these things lightly because our family, we've been reviewing numbers, we've been budget crunching, we've been doing everything we can. We've been looking at hours, how we can trim things off. We want to preserve every single position that we have. We want to continue to be able to provide the resources and the training and the professional and personal development for each and every single person that works for us. They are the foundation of our company, and I can't turn my back on them. Every day, I become more and more scared because I do see that there are going to be significant cost increases, not only in labor, but it's going to also be with my product vendors, my insurance companies, my taxes, my utilities, and the insurance rates will continue to increase over the coming years. I'm positive that our price adjustment won't be able to keep pace with the expense increases because our industry has a regional cap on it. It really does. And I'm going to use an example that the State of Illinois Department of Management Services uses for lodging. Chicago has a higher rate, anywhere from $130 to $219 per guest room per night. But as you start to work your way outside of Chicago, those room rate caps go down and down and down. Central Illinois, we're at $70 a night. Southern Illinois, it's at $60 tonight. So I think it's a clear show of the regional cost variations that exist within the state, that's imposed by the state. So being faced with the increase of labor cost in all of our operations, we're going to be left with no other option but to restructure how we do our business. We're going to more than likely have to eliminate entry-level positions. We're going to evaluate every position on a needs basis, and we'll examine the service levels and the service hours, our hours of operation, and then we're going to decide, is there money left over that we can provide health insurance, retirement, continue our training benefits, and initiate goal incentives? I'm scared. I'm fearful that these changes, I'm going to have to reduce positions, I'm going to have to reduce hours, and overall it is going to reduce the quality of life for the people in Springfield and my employees. So, my final ask, please, let's slow this vote down and let's take some time. Let's find some common ground. Let's find a compromise.
Thank you, Karen.
It's going to be best for the entire state.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Thank you. Our next panelist, brief remarks.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Darren Dame. I'm one of the general managers here in Springfield, Illinois. I'm representing our local hotel association and our statewide association. Springfield, and I'm going to kind of piggyback a little bit on Karen's comments. Springfield hotels have had an average rate of around $86 per night last year. We feel like increasing minimum wage to $15 will force our hotels to raise our rates up to $125 and up. This is not as sustainable as a hotel in Springfield. While we know Chicago can get away with charging rates that high, our market cannot. Visitors, especially our meetings and conference businesses, will choose to go elsewhere as a result. Regions of the state, like Bloomington, have already been dealt a blow in recent years with larger corporations deciding to leave Illinois because of the cost to do business in the state of Illinois. You have heard the governor talk about the impact to the state budget when it comes to paying employees a higher wage. What you haven't heard about is the added burden to the state budget when it comes to higher hotel rates that state employees and legislators are forced to pay because of our added cost. State employees travel throughout Illinois every day, and their costs are about to skyrocket because of this proposal. We hear that state employees have a hard time getting the state per diem rate at hotels now. You haven't seen anything yet. Hotels simply won't be able to offer a discounted rate anymore. This isn't good for our employees either. Most of our owners tell me they pay a majority of their health care costs for quality plans. They contribute to 401k matches, they give cash bonus, etc. That could possibly end because of this. While their hourly wage may go higher, their take-home could actually decrease. If minimum wage increases to $15 in such a short time, we will have to consider cutting our hours and our shifts as a result. We may even have to start going to do more use technology to take care of jobs. Thank you.
Thank you. And the final speaker for this panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and happy birthday. My name is Bo Cole, and I own 2 pharmacies, independent pharmacies, here in Central Illinois. I became a pharmacy owner 8 years ago with the hopes of having a long, impactful career taking care of patients. I felt there was enough profit in pharmacy to support my family while focusing on providing goods and services to customers that will benefit their health. Unfortunately, for the last 3 years, the ability for a pharmacy in Illinois to be profitable has virtually become non-existent. We have been squeezed by increase in DIR fees in 2017, which they are direct and indirect remuneration fees that are extracted from community pharmacies, usually months after a transaction, rather than deducting them from claims on a real-time basis. These retroactive clawbacks make it extremely difficult for community pharmacists to operate the small businesses when they have no idea whether they will break even on a transaction or not until months later. These fees have caused my 2 pharmacies to see $300,000 taken back from the bottom line in 2018 alone, putting me deeply into the red. And I have those numbers at my store if you guys ever actually want to see those. Last April, we saw Medicaid shift 80% of their patients to managed care, which resulted in an increased number of our Medicaid claims that were reimbursed below my cost of medication, from 5% of my claims to 38%. That's right, 38% of my Medicaid claims are below the cost of the drug for me. That doesn't even include payroll or rent or other expenses to operate. I was here last session talking with your fellow representatives about the dire situation Illinois independent pharmacies are in and how we need relief immediately. As an owner of the 2 pharmacies in Central Illinois, I oppose for a minimum wage increase to $15 an hour. Community pharmacies have a unique business structure where over 90% of what we are reimbursed for goods and services is decided by a third-party entity. Whether it's Medicaid, Medicare, or a pharmacy benefit manager, regardless of the cost of goods, they set the price for us. I cannot increase any prices to offset what these new wages will be. My opposition is not a plea to protect my income or affect my lifestyle, nor is it not because I don't know my staff is worth the wage, which no one earns less than $10 an hour. Unfortunately, in the current environment for community independent pharmacies in Illinois, my stores will be forced to look hard at closing because it's not sustainable. If we can manage to keep our doors open, we and many pharmacies across the state may be forced to cut hours of support staff, which could pose serious safety issues as we already face scrutiny from script limiting bills asking for us to provide more staff support. As we suffer from unfair auditing practices by pharmacy benefit managers, being on the short end of the stick in spread pricing, and continually having money taken back in DIR fees, the money that I would gladly pay to my employees is being taken by third parties. This is my reason for opposing an increase to $15.
I thank you, and thanks to all of the speakers on this panel. Do we have any questions? Representative Freeze? You have any comment?
We just heard some testimony just a few minutes ago from quite respected economists who said you guys have nothing to worry about. Everything's rosy. Jobs won't be lost. Even if you have to increase your costs, you can recoup that. Now, these economists spend a lot of time studying, compiling evidence, writing books. All you guys do is show up every day, work your way up. How can you deny what's being said by the previous panel? Can you shed some light on that, anyone?
Yeah, thank you. So I am not opposing a minimum wage increase. I definitely challenge how those studies looked at a 45% increase in minimum wage and how that is sustainable. That I definitely question. But there's no way, there's simply not enough money in independent pharmacy right now to be able to make up for it, and I have no way to adjust what I can earn from insurances to offset this.
And sure, you've risked capital. You had to grow your business, or you've had to improve it in order to keep up with the demands of your customers. How does that play into it?
Starting in November, I started to do the research, review studies that have taken place talking about minimum wage increase. So depending on which university you wanted to look at and what outcome you wanted to have, that's the way you would go. There were multiple universities that had counter arguments. There was no effect, there was a positive effect, there was a negative effect. So it all depends on what and where you look for your data.
Representative, if I might,
Yes,
too,
Rob.
there's two things to look at it with these studies. One, there's a very large group of studies which are very outdated and looked at incremental increases back when we were talking about 6 to 625 or 650. That's one reason in its history, as far as I can tell, Irma never took the sky is falling approach. There is another very small, very new set of studies which focus on city cores, which are the only places that have experienced to date, like Seattle and Chicago. Those studies are far more conflicted about what is happening and what is not happening. The best you can say about Seattle, and they all say that, is that you had some that won and some that lost. And one of the primary researchers for Seattle noted about the Chicago study that you cannot take the experiences of a city core and extrapolate it to a broader geographic and economic diverse base, such as the entire state of Illinois, or for that matter, the state of Washington. And he was very clear on that, for the strengths that I've noted previously in other testimony that Chicago enjoys that no one else does.
Thank you for your testimony. I can follow that, and I will do some further study, and when the representative sends me further information on some of those economist studies. But thank you for your testimony today.
Thank you, Representative Freeze. Representative Bennett for questions, comment.
Thank you, Representative. Both, I guess, comments and questions. This whole thing about economics, this has been going on since, gracious, Nixon was president, when they talk about different aspects and the economies in one way or the other, from the different economic professors, et cetera, with the data. But I just want to ask the question again, just to make sure that everyone's hearing what you're saying, is that this data that we've heard is saying that it's all one way and it's all rosy and there won't be any downside, no losses of hours and no loss of jobs. That's not what your experience is. I'm just clarifying for the record that that's not your experience. You guys are involved with payroll. I hear the tone in your voices talking about how much you care about your business, about you care about the people you work with, and I really heard some pain there. I might have been the only one. I don't know. I bet not. But I would really appreciate for you to share what you're saying, what you're thinking.
Services will go down. Employees will have to take some cuts, and you will see less people being hired. Yes.
Okay. Representative, in my entire time with Irma, when we've debated minimum wage off and on throughout, I've never had employers or members calling me, fighting tears, because they can't make the math work. Again, it goes back to comparing 6 to 620 or 650 versus 825 to 15. And it's not just theirs, it's all the services and service providers that will increase their costs, borders, remote sales, and the fact, again, that they don't enjoy the same strengths as the city of Chicago.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you all for coming today.
I thank you, Representative Bennett. Representative Reich for a quick question, comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rob, you heard me ask a puzzled question to the previous panel about the calculation of the credit. What's your interpretation of that calculation?
It's impossible to calculate it, number one, because you don't have you don't know what the full-time equivalent number is. You need to know what full-time means. And we don't have that hour to calculate to someone. I forget who made the point earlier. We don't know if it's 30 as it is under, you know, ACA or 8 ACA, I believe it is, or 35 and a half, or what that number is. So it's impossible to calculate, number one. Number two, you have to get beyond that and look at who doesn't qualify. And within the bill, number one, you have the technical issue, which by a literal reading of the literal language means no one qualifies until that's fixed. Number one. Number two, if you are a franchisee and you own more than one location, you're out. Or if you're a franchisee and you own one store but you file as part of a unitary group, you're out. And if your wage rate falls, whether you had to lay people off, for example, had to close a location, whatever that might be, if that falls compared to the previous quarter, you're out. So there's a lot of catches in the bill that disqualify a whole lot of employers.
A whole lot of employers who are the people who actually hire the most people at the beginning steps of their climb up the economic ladder at a wage where they learn job skills as well. Is that what you're saying?
I am, and I would also note that when you look at the calculation of who hires and in what category, you really need to bump it up to 150 by location to really start to get to those who really drive the vast majority of employment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Reich. Representative Wheeler for questions, comment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rob, you and I have talked about this bill on a number of occasions. I just wanted to make sure I understand some numbers here. The minimum wage on December 31st of this year, 2019, would still be $8.25. Is that correct?
Sorry. Everywhere except the city of Chicago and Cook County, correct.
Correct. And if you fast forward to January 1st of 2021, my math shows it'll jump up to $11 an hour.
That's correct.
Let's say jump of 2,075 cents an hour in 367 days.
Correct.
Which is roughly a year in my math.
For business planning purposes, and I would defer, you've run a business. Well, I run a business, frankly. Yes, that's a year and for planning purposes.
Yeah, so we're looking at a 33% increase in that number in a year.
Correct.
So when we talk about this ramp making an impact on downstate communities, both employers, private and public sector, that's a huge jump. If we had any other increase in our business expenses of 33% in 1 year, that would be a substantial hit to bottom lines for virtually everybody that I ever talked to in business. And this is a state mandated jump that provides no other back value to it. There's nothing tied to this bill that I can find besides a credit, which we still have disputes about its usefulness and its effectiveness based on who can use it and how long it lasts. But at the same time, there's no property tax relief in here. There's no workers' compensation relief in this bill that I can find. Is I wrong in that? This is a straight increase.
Correct.
To the members who came here today, thank you again. First of all, thank you for being employers in the state of Illinois. We don't make it easy on you. So I want to applaud your efforts and the fact that you took the risk and put forth your careers effectively to make a difference to the people who live here that work for you. If you could just very quickly explain to me the combination of inflation that you see coming from this by you raise your own prices, cuts to your employment, or the fact that you may consider, in some cases, looking at other alternatives for locations for your business. If you could just answer those very quick, I know we don't have much time, but those are important things for people to understand that there are real jobs in line here or real costs of inflation that are going to come with this, or you're going to leave altogether. Those are the three choices that I see businesses getting to make here. So if you want to begin, that'd be great.
As an example, in the food service industry, we buy a lot of our products, obviously, from farms. So farmers are going to experience a rate increase in the minimum wage. Then it's going to a food processor. They're going to experience the same rate increase. Then it's going to go to a distributor, which have the same rate increase. And then it's going to come to me as the retailer, and then I'm going to have to turn around and raise my rates. But before it comes to me, there's 3 tiers of rate increases that will affect my product cost before I decide how many employees I can afford, how much food can I afford to buy, what type of services can I afford, and can I still keep my lights on, can I keep my mortgage paid, can I pay my property taxes?
All right, thank you. Any further questions? Thank you, Representative Wheeler. Representative Cabello for question or comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
What's that? Oh, it was excuse me, Representative Cabello. Did anyone else want to make a quick comment and that answer the question?
What I would add to it is it's kind of like taking, in the hotel industry, it's kind of like taking your house. You guys have bills to pay every month. It's going to be like taking a 33% increase plus 33% increase to making your bills every month without having to do something on the top part too. That's what it's going to look like. It's just, hotels is just a big house that you're trying to make a payment for.
Anyone else wanted to chime in or no? All right, thank you, Representative Wheeler. That's complete. That's it. Anyone else? Oh, go ahead, sir. No.
Well, I don't have any ability to inflate my prices, so it would most likely be closing my doors and selling to a big box competitor.
All right, thank you. Again, thank you all. Thank you, Representative Wheeler. Representative Cabello for question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Carr, I've got a few questions for you, if you don't mind. I apologize for putting you on the spot. We've heard a lot of testimony about how in different parts of the state it makes sense to keep everybody at $15 an hour. Can you tell me what the tax rate is within the city limits of Chicago?
2.75% is the 10.75%. I'm sorry, 10.75%.
10.75%. Can you
that's
tell me what the...
10.25, I'm sorry, it's 10.25 or 10.75. There's also the pure authority area that goes a little bit higher. That's why I'm struggling to recall the number.
Okay, just give me the lowest rate.
10.25%.
10.25%. Can you tell me what the tax rate is within the city of Rockford, sales tax?
As I recall, it's 7 1/4.
Excuse President Carr, could you please speak into the microphone?
As I recall, it's
Thank you.
7 1/4.
Okay. Do you know maybe like Bloomington, Marion, what's it like around the rest of the state? Is it anywhere close to Chicago?
There's nobody else that's really close to Chicago that I can recall, no.
Okay, so there could be a case to be made that there is reasons why in different parts of the state people are getting paid differently. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, would you think that maybe if the tax rates weren't so high, the rates that people are getting paid now, they would actually have more money in their pocket if the tax rates weren't so high?
Well, of course.
So what we're saying is, if we really want to help people, maybe we should be reducing the taxes that we actually impact on their lives. Maybe the size of government should shrink so that the people that actually pay for everything have more money in their pockets. So you should go back to where you guys live and talk to the people that are raising the taxes on you. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Cabello. Representative Weber for question, comment?
Thank you. So living in Lake County, which is the highest property taxes in the state, and I think about 14th highest in the nation, I've been approached by many business owners that feel that, you know, they may not put them out of business. However, the cost of goods are going to have to go up. Somehow, I feel like we've been told here today that this is some kind of adrenaline boost for our economy. To me, it looks like just another tax on our local residents. Do you see this as something that will just be a direct pass-off to consumers?
I'm not sure how.
Yeah, who are you directing your question to, Representative Weber?
Oh, to the panel, to the business owners.
Okay. All of them, or we got a particular
All of them.
one? Okay. Whoever would like to take it, one individual, please.
Would you like you? In Springfield, Illinois, I'm not sure how much price increase to pass off to the consumer is tolerable. Can I charge $15 for a cocktail like Chicago? I can't. There becomes a cap. There's a ceiling there that I can't go above. So if my product costs keep going up and up and up, and labor cost and overhead cost in general go up, there's a point that I can't sell that product, and I'm just going to have to close the doors.
I guess my saying is I have spoken to a regional operations of a fast food restaurant chain, and they said, well, it won't put us out of business, but you might want to expect to pay $10 for a box of donuts, which to me is another direct tax. That makes Illinois more expensive than somewhere else to live. So.
Like I said in my statement, if, you know, in the city of Springfield, at $15, you're going to have to see hotels go up to $125 to keep the doors open. You're going to have cost. We all are franchisees, so we don't own the, you know, we're not the Marriotts, we're not the Hiltons. We are individual owners. We pay them to have their hotel's name on our in town. I mean, we pay them.
I thank you, Representative Weber. Representative Skillcorn for question or comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question is for Ms. Khan. You had a story about some of your employers, or employees, I'm sorry, that, you know, if this comes through, people might have to be laid off, there might be a reduction in hours, and you started getting a little bit emotional. Can you share with us a little bit of that? And if this passes, is this a good thing for your employees?
It's emotional because I've already started calculating every position in every business, the man hours worked weekly, monthly, annually. And as I go through and I say, okay, weekly, it's just a little number. Then monthly, it becomes a bigger number. And annually, it becomes an even bigger number. And then when I calculate that out of what it's going to cost me at $15 an hour, just for the increase in minimum wage. So that's the floor increase. That's the entry-level position. Those numbers become so staggering that it makes me cry, because there's no way I can sustain that kind of an increase in the business that I'm in. Now, that's an entry-level position that comes in at 15. I have people that are making slightly more than that have been with me for a few years. There's an expectation that they need to be raised, as they should be, because now an entry-level position's at $15. So somebody that's been working in this job, advancing their way through, making $17, $18, $19, they're now worth $25. So it's hard for me not to get emotional when I look at these kind of numbers and say, how am I gonna do this? I can't raise my prices that much. I need to start looking at a different industry. Do I need to start looking at a different state? You know, I don't want to do that because I love everybody that works for me. They're family. We had a big birthday party last night at Obid's, and the staff that wasn't on the clock, they were there partying with us because we're one great big family. So this touches me personally when I have to start eliminating positions and reducing man hours, because I know it's going to affect the quality of life for the people that I have to slash.
And though you got emotional not because of numbers on a page, but because of names and faces of employees that you value, right?
Yes. This isn't all about numbers, because I put the human factor into this. These are my friends. Everybody that works for me, we're a team. I haven't got to where I am today to be successful without having them, because they make up the foundation of this business. I can't do it by myself. Yes, I can go back in, I can work longer, I can work harder, I can do more of the jobs myself, but I still can't do it all myself. I need my team. I need my family.
So these are friends that you love that this legislation is going to hurt.
Potentially it will hurt. If we take the entire state of Illinois, we compare it to Chicago and say everybody should be at $15, but our cost of living, to have an apartment in Springfield, 2-bedroom, nice apartment, you're looking at $550 downtown, on the peripheral downtown. That same apartment in Chicago would probably cost 5 times as much. So our cost of living's different. Somebody making $13 an hour is living well. It's a livable wage.
So one last question, and this is to the panel, and short from each one of you guys. Is there a point where, I mean, if this goes through, businesses are going to have to raise costs. I mean, they can't just absorb it. You can't just make money out of the air. You're going to have to raise costs. You're going to have to pass this cost on to consumers. Personally, is there a cost that's too much for you guys to pay, you know, for whatever product? If you just want to quickly go through, think of a product that, if this goes through, you know, is there a cost that's too high?
I've spoken with employers that there's a cost at a gallon of milk. You cannot go above, you know, a certain price on a gallon of milk. I mean, there are staples that will not go any further. So yes, there are legitimate costs that you cannot go any further.
Yeah, could each person just give a quick, I think Representative Skilcorn asked for a quick response, as quick as you can.
Well, yeah, there's definitely a limit to what I would pay for something, but also, like in my field, I don't have the ability to increase that price at all. I have no way of offsetting that other than trying to get more volume and more traffic in the store, but I'm still limited to what that could be.
Mine would probably be eating out at restaurants. I don't know what that price would be, but that's something that I would probably have to cut back on.
Thank you. Representative Skilcorn, thank you. Representative Ugaste for a question or quick comment.
Chairman, thank you, and happy birthday. To the panel, and not all of you need to answer, but maybe if one or two of you could. I've heard you talk about you're going to have to raise your prices to the extent you can, as well as cut hours and other things. I assume as businesses, you buy goods and services from other businesses within the state, whether it's manufactured here or someone's providing a service. To the extent they have to raise their price that they're charging you, and yet you might be able to obtain those same goods or services from an out-of-state provider that's not facing that same inflationary pressure, what will you end up doing in order to helping save your business or provide the wage you're being required to provide by this bill? And if you need me to rephrase it, I'll be happy to.
Well, our industry is going to take a look at it from trying to find the lowest cost we can. If that means comes from North Dakota, we're going to go that direction. You have to, if you have some cost that we cannot deal with, we're going to try to figure out how to take it differently. I mean, you have to have at least one person on the front desk. You have to man the ship. You know, typically you'll see in hotels, you'll see multiple people at the front desk. My concern is, what do we do when we get down to one person? How long are you guys willing to stand in, guys and gals, willing to stand at the check-in counter to check into hotel? When is it going to be enough for you to say, hey, I'm going to go to a different town, I'm going to go to a different hotel because I can't put up with sitting here waiting this long? Or are you going to hop on your app and check in by that way?
Thank you. Any further? Representative, are you complete with your question?
I was just hoping to hear from one more business.
Yeah, please, someone or one additional person from the panel, please make a comment.
Let's look at an example of a regulated industry, and that is liquor. I can only purchase a product from one vendor by state law. So if that product goes up, I'm forced to continue to buy that product from that vendor because that's their district, their region, and I have to buy it. I can quit selling that product or not buy that product and offer that product in my services. But then there becomes an effect of, will my customers go somewhere else to find that product?
Okay. So it'd be fair to say, though, that if this occurs, not only will you have to look at things that will impact your own business and employees within your business, but you may stop buying from other people within Illinois to the extent you have to, and jobs may be lost there as well because business is going elsewhere?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Spokesperson Worley for a question.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all for taking the time to be here today. It's important that we hear from you, and I appreciate you making time in your schedule. Mr. Carr, the bill sponsor said that this is basically the same legislation from 2 years ago. Have there been any concessions either since then or in the short term? I mean, have we made any progress in coming into a collaborative effort here?
The only changes to the bill that I recall is the change in the ramp by 1 year. The claim is 2, but it's, as we've discussed earlier, it's, I think Representative Wheeler pointed out, it's essentially 1 year. There were technical changes to the tax credit at the behest, I believe at the behest of the department, and there was a change in the teen wage for at the behest of the park districts. Those are the 3 concessions, if you will.
And you're willing to further negotiate this bill?
As we've pointed out repeatedly, and I can give the timeline if necessary, we've publicly and in various meetings given 2 alternatives done in other states, supported by the same proponents in those states, both blue states, and that we would actually, IRMA, I can only speak for IRMA, would actually stand up and support it. In
So
one of those,
you could possibly, IRMA, I want to make sure that is heard loud and clear. There's legislation out there, suggestions that you've made that if taken into this language, IRMA would support the legislation?
there is no language, but the proposals were put forward at multiple occasions, and I've talked about it publicly multiple times.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, spokesperson. Representative Marwick for question or comment.
Thank you. So, and first of all, thank you all the people from the business community coming to testify. I appreciate your concerns, and I hear them. So earlier during the question and answer, I don't know if you were here to hear that or not, but I cited some studies, some economic data studies, which I don't know. I mean, that was just, I didn't do them. I just read them. But apparently that, you know, apparently it's a phooey science now. I guess we shouldn't think about that sort of stuff. So I thought to myself, fair enough. I just want to sort of understand the real world consequences. And so, you know, trying to find some sort of something I could hang my hat on. And so I hear the argument about how the cost of living up in Chicago, and for the record, the minimum wage increase in Chicago, I believe it's currently at $12 an hour, is it, Kelly, or are we at 13? Did we reach 13? We're 12. 12, we're about to be 13, right? Yeah. So it's about a 50% higher minimum wage, right, roughly. And, but it's not just Chicago, right? I mean, it's Cook County, and I know that the two can be confused, but Cook County also has a higher minimum wage ordinance that's been passed, right? So, go ahead. Oh, well, I guess my point is I can assume that when you say that there's a higher cost of living in Chicago, you're talking about the fact that, for instance, we discussed, one of the representatives brought up the fact that we have a higher sales tax, which is a higher cost of goods sold, right? A higher sales tax that affects the cost of the goods that are sold, right? Because the ultimate price is going to be higher, right? We have higher property taxes just by virtue of the fact that if you were to buy a similarly situated restaurant property in downtown Springfield and you bought the same property in downtown Chicago, the value would be substantially higher and your taxes are a percentage of your value, right? So we assume that the cost is higher. We also have, as we know, if you are in downtown Chicago, you have a higher labor cost because we have the higher minimum wage. So you would not be surprised to find out then that costs of goods in Chicago are higher than they are in Springfield. So just like literally, and I don't mean this as any science, I brought out the science last time and that got dismissed. So this is just an empirical study, and I don't mean this to be that anyone should hang their hat on this, but you know, I don't know, Rob, I like steak. I'm not supposed to eat as much anymore because I had a little heart thing, but I do like steak. And so I kind of looked up my favorite restaurant here that was cited in Capital Facts here in Springfield, Lukanen's. And I looked up my favorite steak restaurant in Chicago, Gene and Giorgetti's, and I was surprised to find that a 12-ounce filet is $38 no matter where you buy it, at Gene and Giorgetti's or at Lukanen's here in Springfield. So if the cost of doing business in Chicago is so much more expensive and can support much higher prices, why isn't that steak half the price here in Springfield? Your labor costs are less, your property taxes that you have to pay to run your business are less. So how does that jive, right? Like I said, I said the studies, those were dismissed, but you've got two identical items costing exactly the same. Can you justify that?
Well, sure, but you can't look at just a single item. I mean, that's like, oh boy, never mind. I don't want to touch climate change. You can't look at a single item and say, well, that's the case. You've got to look at the entire scope. No question, steak is expensive no matter where you are. Frankly, I'm surprised to hear that $38 is the cost of a steak at Gene and Giorgetti's, because I've been to other steakhouses in Chicago. I'm sorry.
It's an 8-ounce filet. Yeah, I mean, you get the monster one. It's going to cost more.
Well, but I'm like you. I try to, for reasons, have to go stay away from it a little bit.
Yeah, that's right.
But the prices, I've seen $10, $12, $15 higher than that. So I think it always comes a little bit to where you're shopping, right? And if you're buying a steak at Lukanen's in Springfield, it's probably it's at the top of the market here. There's a lot of options well below that. So you can't just look at one item.
But I mean, I didn't pick, a cheap steakhouse in Chicago. I picked Gene and Giorgetti's, right? I mean, that's like the quintessential Chicago steakhouse. So I'm sure that there are some Yeah. Kelly's arguing me whether or not it's the best one or not. But that's
a separate discussion. It's like pizza.
Yeah. So I guess my point is that it's not the dramatically different pricing that you're seeing, and yet every cost that goes into doing business in the city of Chicago is substantially higher. So I would suggest that maybe prices aren't always. I mean, I get the fact that labor cost goes into the cost of your prices, but so does what you can get for it.
But
right?
I think this goes. Oh, I'm sorry. Were you finished? I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying, realistically speaking, if you're in business, you're going to sell your steak for whatever you think you can sell it for. Right?
Well, but I think you also have to factor in the point we have been making consistently throughout this debate, which is you can't compare Chicago for all of its strengths to the other parts of the state. They enjoy a volume level that no one else enjoys. No one. 55+ million tourists, millions that come into the city center every day. You just can't compete with that. And I think that would explain an awful lot.
Yeah, I don't know that it explains that one little thing. But again, I didn't mean that to be dispositive. It was just sort of as I was sitting here, I was looking for a comparison, and I was interested to find that. So, you know, like I said, in Chicago, I talked to restaurateurs who cannot find help. They have to pay in excess of the minimum wage just to get people to show up because the labor market is doing so well. There are so few workers, they have to compete for them, and the wages are driven even higher than what the minimum is, which would mean the cost would be even higher and higher and higher. But that effect apparently seems to be having positive effects on our economy and in the greater Cook County region as well.
Thank you, Representative Mark. Yeah, very, very quick follow-up.
Yes, one of the things I just want to add to that comment is that, well, the state of Illinois must think it's differently because they are allowing state per diem of $135 for a hotel room up there. Downstate, we're at $70.
Great, thank you. I have a quick question before we get to our final question. I think the only restaurateur is Karen Khan. You have the restaurants, correct? A variety of restaurants, correct?
Yes, sir.
Do you utilize the tip credit for your tip workers?
Yes, sir, I do.
And you're familiar with the amount that's being paid to your tip workers?
Currently, the rate is $4.95. Can you hear me?
Yeah, please continue.
The current rate is $4.95. It's a 60-40, so we pay 60% of the minimum wage, and tips makes up for the 40% difference. We do monitor that closely. But I will tell you that every server in our restaurant makes well above the minimum wage.
But you're familiar that the tip credit is staying the same in Senate Bill 1, correct?
The 60-40 percentage is what I understand is staying the same.
And you aware of that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? A final question, comment for this panel. Leader Will Davis.
So I missed some of the earlier conversation. So I think the chairman just cleared up, ma'am, you are in the restaurant business. Are you able to share which restaurants here in Springfield that you own or are partner to? I'm curious.
My family and I own Obed and Isaac's Microbrewery and Eatery and William Van Coffee. We also own the Inn at 835, which has a 300-seat banquet facility.
Okay, I see. And the gentleman next to you, Rob, is he a business owner?
My name is Colin. I'm the Director of Government Affairs with the Naperville Area Chamber of Commerce. The two businesses with the data that I provided preferred not to provide their particular locations.
Okay, so, but you say the Naperville Area Chamber of Commerce?
That's correct, sir.
Okay, I see. Sir?
I am currently a general manager of a hotel, but my ownership has let me bought into a new hotel we're putting together, but I'm not sure if that's a wise choice right now.
Which hotels can you share?
Yes, I can. We have the Residence Inn in Springfield here, and then we're getting ready to open up a Spring Hill Suites.
Okay, thank you very much. And you're in the pharmacy business, correct? Are you on mail order pharmacies or?
No, I have two independent community pharmacies here in Springfield and in Jacksonville.
Okay, do people come to you to get their prescriptions, or do you supply other places where people get them?
No, they come to me.
They do come to you. So there's been some conversation made about, I guess, the hotel per diem difference in Chicago and Springfield. I don't know anything about that. So how is the per diem determined?
That's determined through JCAR, I'm assuming, and again, I don't know the 100% facts on this, but I do know there's a travel advisory council,
right,
that helps put those rates together.
So which comes first, JCAR or the advisory?
Travel Advisory Council, I'm assuming, is the first, and then it goes through JCAR after that.
And then JCAR. So when was the last time the advisory council recommended an increase?
We finally did get an increase. We have not gotten an increase since 2003.
Okay.
They did finally put an increase together this year. That is, I don't think it's been approved yet, but it's supposed to set through at July 1st. But it's still not. It's been proposed, but I'm not sure where we're at on it.
Okay. I guess if, as much as you are making the comparison with your per diem rates, it sounds like you control that more so than anything. If an advisory council makes a request to JCAR, then the advisory council, I assume, are local businesses, correct?
No, sir. The Travel Advisory Council is one member from each department. For example,
so it's all state controlled?
It is. It's all state controlled, and that's been one of our concerns. Is from 2003, we've not had an increase since then.
Okay, but never mind. I could probably have some arguments for you on that, why you let it go for so long without trying to get an increase, it seems like.
But we can't control that because it's kind of like a monopoly. They controlled what they would allow you to be and what your rate would be.
It's all about advocacy, sir. I don't know the last time you advocated for a rate increase.
Every year.
That's all I'm saying.
Every year.
To what committee here?
We've presented to the Travel Advisory Council every year.
Is that a committee?
That is a committee.
Is that a legislative committee?
I'm
just saying.
It's made up of agencies, as I understand it.
Okay,
and they're sensitive to the state budget, so their concerns are driven by as much what the state budget can afford as to what these individuals are charging.
Okay, understood. And so to the young lady there, you talked about how do you have any idea how much or what percentage of your employees spend money in your restaurants?
I will say a good portion of our employees spend money in our restaurants, but they have a 50% employee discount because they are family, and we encourage them to stay within the family.
I'm not questioning that they're family. I understand that. I'm just curious to know what that looks like. Do they spend the money that you pay them? How much of it do they spend in your restaurant?
I don't have the exact figures on that.
Okay, but you feel that they do?
They do, but I would also like to take it one step further, that we do also provide meals to our employees while they're there.
Okay.
So if they take their 30-minute break and they want to stay on property, we feed them.
They can have that $38 steak if they want to.
Unfortunately, my price points aren't quite that high.
Okay. Okay, fair enough, fair enough. So the reason I kind of asked that question, particularly of you, is that I'm a believer that if you increase these wages, that the people who are getting the additional wages, they just turn around and spend it. And if they eat in your restaurant, that means you'll be the beneficiary of the additional money that they get. That's just what I believe.
But here's my concern. In 5 years, when we're at $15 an hour, is that $5 that person has in their pocket today worth $5 in 5 years? Or is it now $2.50, really, the value? Because everything else has gone up.
So are you suggesting it needs to be higher? I mean, if everything else is going up.
What I'm suggesting?
We're prepared.
He's making a case for minimum wage.
I'm not trying, but I firmly believe, particularly for low wage earners, and whatever term that is, that if you give them more money, they're going to spend it. I think I asked Rob at our last hearing, is there some data that suggests, what that equates to? Because I just believe they'll turn around and spend it. I had a conversation with some folks from McDonald's earlier today. I wish they were sitting up here and they could share their stories as well. But I've got to think that if I'm working in McDonald's and I get a little bit more money, I'm just going to buy more McDonald's, among other things. Don't get me wrong, among other things. So my question is, isn't there a impact to the economy that if you put more money in people's pockets, that they'll turn around and spend it?
If I might, Leader Davis, because you and I did touch on this yesterday. Sorry, losing track of time a little bit. Yesterday, if that were indeed the case, we would not see franchisees closing in Chicago or in parts of Cook County. We would not see what we saw in Representative Hurley's district, where restaurants moved right across the street. We would not see Walgreens or CVS closing or other stores closing because they can't stay profitable. There's no evidence from the city of Chicago's experiences that that's happening, except on the near north side and the city center.
The question then becomes, do we know why they're not profitable? I mean, is there a such thing as oversaturation? Because people just have so many choices that they can't spend they now have additional choices to spend their money. I mean, I guess in as much as you want us to view this in some kind of macro way, then let's examine macro ways why some of those things that you mentioned are happening. And I think the point that I was trying to make last week, it wasn't because there wasn't enough money in the South Suburban area near Lincoln Mall that they couldn't have stayed afloat. Those companies made a conscious decision to move further away and move further away from people. So if they lost revenue, it was because they decided it was better for them to be in Orland than to stay in Matheson and Lincoln Mall. So some of the decisions that business owners are making are also contributing to some of what we heard. And again, you say when restaurants close, I don't know. I know sometimes I go to a restaurant more than once, and the next time I go there, the quality is different, the food tastes different, and I may make a decision not to go to that restaurant again. So if they're deciding that in order to increase their profits, they're making decisions, internal decisions about the food that they serve, the quality of the food that they serve, which, you know, we're making decisions as well about where we want to spend our money. So as much as we're going to view this in some macro way, then, you know, we ought to be talking about why, you know, businesses in some cases are indeed closing, and there are other reasons why. And just very quickly, ma'am, when you mention a nice 2-bedroom apartment in downtown Springfield for $500, a few ears perked up and said, where is it? Because they wanted to know where it was. Haven't been able to find that one in some cases as well. It was a comment you made, but some of my colleagues said, well, where's that place at? You know, because many of them live in apartments. Me, to your point, sir, I've been staying in the same hotel here in Springfield for 16 years. Same one. And I have no reason to change it at this point unless the quality goes down. And the quality is not dependent upon what we're talking about right now. At least not in my opinion. There are a lot of reasons that impact that. So when that changes, yeah, I'll be looking for another hotel. And I can guarantee you that other people will be doing the same as well. So as far as the per diem stuff, I apologize. I thought there was more local input in determining that. If it's all just the state agencies making it, then I would have thought that the local folks would have come and pleaded a case to us, because, you know, we deal with tourism here as a committee as well. At least we had a tourism committee. I don't think we have it anymore, but, you know, so this is the first conversation I've ever had with anybody the 16 years I've been here about raising the per diem. And that's my own ignorance. I understand that because I didn't know how it was determined. But I would love to have had business owners like yourself come and say to the legislature, who takes advantage of that per diem rate for those of us that stay in hotels, you know, it needs to be increased. You know, the legislature should advocate for an increase. I've never heard that, so therefore I never have. I'm glad that you are getting a little bit of an increase. If you want more, you know, give me a letter. I'll sign it and send it to all 4 of those agencies saying it should be higher. You know, because I appreciate the fact that you need resources to do business. I'm clear on that, you know, but let's think about it in a broader context in terms of, again, I think that if you put more money in people's pockets, they'll spend it, which helps our economy. And some of the challenges that businesses have is not because people just arbitrarily stop. There's oversaturation because there's just too many new places. I mean, here in Springfield, you guys are throwing up restaurants like crazy. You know, not only just the local restaurants, but also chain restaurants as well. So I don't know how much impact you have on the, you know, the local folks here to say, slow down with the restaurants. You know, or is that just, you know, it's capital society and you got to buy into it because that's what you live? I don't know. And then let's think about the quality of some of those services, the quality of what's being provided versus restaurants, as well as the quality overall, as some of the reasons why we have decline in businesses as well. So to the extent in which this bill comes up, I'm listening and I've heard what some of you have said. I'm not as technical as Representative Wright. I can't tell you what $4.32 means and all of that kind of stuff, but I just know I've got money. I want to spend money, and people who would like to have better lives, they want those resources so they can have better lives. So I hope for your family and those individuals, and I don't know, did you ever survey the people in your restaurant to see if they'd be okay with a minimum wage increase, or are they okay with where things are? So as much as they're your family, you know, maybe they shared some things with you as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader Davis. And again, thank you to the committee members. And thank you to the panel too.